We are pounding away at media days across the country with the SEC, the Big 12, and the ACC underway this week. The Big 12 completed by Tuesday. We bring in Steve Helwick. He covers the University of Texas at the Daily Texan and also there at the on-campus television station TSTV. Steve, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well, Mark.
Like to remind everyone to like, comment, and subscribe, even if you don't agree with us. If you love college football coverage, it gets a little better than the best bloggers, broadcasters, and writers in the industry, plus analysis from myself. And we have covered media days across the country like no one else. If you like the audio, instead, you go Google Play, Podbean, iTunes, and Stitcher, and just search Mark Rogers TV. Tom Herman hit the podium. This would be his second Big 12 Media Days in Frisco, Texas. Steve, what comes to mind first and foremost in regards to anything that he said of relevance?
Tom Herman, one of the things that he always has to address is a quarterback situation. So that's at the forefront of all Texas fans' minds, because that's a lingering issue Texas has had really since Colt McCoy left the program, is who's going to be quarterback next Saturday. And he says that they have a lot of good depth right now. They have the two freshmen coming in, Cameron Rising and Casey Thompson, and he considers them in the mix of the QB battle with Sam Ehlinger and Shane Buechele, some of the more established veterans, not just on Texas, but in the entire Big 12. So when I look at all the Big 12 teams, I actually think Texas might have the best quarterback depth. I'm not saying that they have the best quarterbacks, because that belongs to Will Grier in West Virginia, but they have incredible depth at the position, and that's something you can be a little comfortable with. Herman's also talked about how impressed he has been with the team in the weight room, with strength coach Nancy McKnight, who came from Houston, who he brought over, and how he gave a lot of stats on what the players are running, what they're jumping, what they're lifting now, and he's very impressed with the strength training that they've done this summer. Texas has recently done a lot of facility upgrades, and that's also a good sign to see that the players are using them and getting stronger and better, but I'm sure that's happening with a lot of programs in the nation. But that was something Herman was really touching on. Another thing he talked about, he loves the shift that the NCAA's had recently in favoring student athletes a little more. They're getting more rights, I would say, in the new redshirt rule, and players can play up to 4 games, I believe, under this rule, and that student athletes are getting more and more leniency from the NCAA to do things. I know they still have tough restrictions, but Herman seems pro-student athlete, and that's very good for recruiting, I think, just to be a coach who embodies what it means to be a student athlete and favors his players. And I think Tom Herman is using some of that to his advantage and letting his players speak their minds, favoring more rights and less NCAA regulation to the student athletes. So those were some of the main things Herman touched on. Once again, he's a very football-minded guy. They brought him in. This is his second year he'll be on campus. But this year, Herman's paired with a new AD in Chris Del Conte. You may have heard the name before. Chris Del Conte came from TCU, and he was a very good and successful athletic director along with when working with Gary Patterson at TCU. And it's amazing he made the switch to Texas, probably just because Texas has a lot of money in the program, something TCU doesn't have as much, despite TCU having more athletic success in recent years. But Chris Del Conte, unlike previous ADs at Texas, seems to be a forward thinker. And this is someone who's also going to help change the complexion of the program, probably, because he's one of the people, he's very active on Twitter. He listens to fan suggestions, listens to student suggestions, and he's just working on making and on improving everything. And I think an AD is a very important part of the football staff too, not just what Tom Herman does, because Herman's mainly coaching what you do in those 60 minutes. But I think Chris Del Conte is also doing a good job of running this football program, even if it's more behind the scenes.
Did Tom Herman slight his hand at all in regards to what he showed or what he had to say about Sam Ehlinger and Shane Buechele in regards to the quarterback race? I'm guessing that he didn't, but at the same time, was there anything that he said that highlighted one player or the other?
He he's not. He's going to be one of the people that hides a lot of that. He talked a lot of their strengths about saying Sam was tightening up his release a little. How when he got into bad habits after breaking his wrist in high school and he said that he wanted Shane to be more vocal and less passive, which is something that Shane struggled. So he talked about some of their weaknesses, but says that they're both improving on them, and he thinks that the two freshmen can give them a run for his money as well. I don't think that's really realistic to think that someone other than Sam Ehlinger or Shane Buechele is going to be the week one starter. It would have to take some injuries or poor quarterback play to probably see Rising or Thompson start a game this year, much less throw a ball in a meaningful close game. But they have a lot of good quarterbacks on the roster. Not any that are great, elite, all-American type quarterbacks, but there are a lot of solid quarterbacks, it seems like, on the roster. And Tom Herman's not going to outright say, probably not even until the Maryland game, maybe a couple days before, who that starter is. We might not even know until the first snap of the game.
Did he give any indication as to having possibly more confidence in the offensive line than what the offensive line has shown in recent years?
I don't think he really touched too much on the offensive line. Obviously, the loss of Connor Williams is going to be the big thing there. But Herb Hand, the new offensive line coach they just brought in from Auburn, previously at Penn State, that's definitely going to be one of the biggest changes this year, is who's coaching the offensive line. And Herb Hand, I believe, is also going to assist in calling plays. So the offensive line, it's a younger unit, I'd say, in terms of experience. They have a lot of seniors on the roster like Elijah Rodriguez and Calvin Anderson who haven't had much playing time. But it's not a cohesive unit that's played together a lot. So I think the offensive line, if it even seems possible, I think that's one of the things that's going to go downhill a little for Texas this year without a leader like Connor Williams. I remember interviewing guys like Jake McMillan before. He was a former guard for Texas, and he was just talking about how much Connor Williams means to the offensive line, not his skill set, but also his leadership, helping them in the weight room, helping them in practice. Connor Williams was everything a college offensive lineman needed to be, and losing him, that is definitely one of the biggest losses. And I don't know how Texas can recover for that. It's not like offensive line has been one of the strengths of their recruiting. That's mainly been within the secondary. And it might be a tough year for Sam Ehlinger and Shane Buechele behind that front five in the trenches.
Got Steve Helwick on the line. He writes for the Daily Texan, also works for TSTV on campus at the University of Texas. So we've addressed the quarterback, the offensive line. What players accompanied Tom Herman to Frisco, Texas?
I think the most notable one is Breckyn Hager. Breckyn Hager, he is one of the most interesting figures in college football. He has that Baker Mayfield, I'd say, persona to him, where he will say what's on his mind. He has a very, very strong personality, and he's very easy to talk to, pretty outgoing. This was something that bit him in the back a little early in his college career, and he acknowledged that. He changed his complete persona last year after the 13-10 loss against Oklahoma State. He went up to Tom Herman, he said, and he thanked him for being his coach in the middle of the game and apologized for being, he said, I'm not going to repeat his language on here, but he said that he apologized just for being a rude person to Herman before. Hager's a very passionate guy. I'd say he's that leader on the defense now. He's going to be a senior this year, and he's been labeled as just a nonconformist type of guy. He's very easy to recognize. He has a long, flowing blonde hair that he hasn't cut since 2015 that says he won't cut it again until Texas wins the Big 12, which he'll donate it to a charity organization, Locks of Love, once he does that. So he has a lot of interesting pieces to his story, and he's definitely a player that's interesting to watch. His dad, Britt Hager, is actually the all-time leader for tackles at Texas, but he mentioned that his dad doesn't get much recognition for it because he didn't win games at Texas in the late 80s when he played for him. And that's when Breckyn Hager said that he's not caring as much about his stats anymore, and he's focusing more on just building a winning culture at Texas. And he has other mentors in his family too in football. Bryce Hager, he played linebacker at Baylor, is now on the Los Angeles Rams. So Breckyn Hager was definitely the most interesting player that they brought to media day. They didn't bring any of the quarterbacks there. The other players they brought, Patrick Vahe, he's an experienced offensive lineman. He's the anchor of that line now as a guard, best player there. Chris Nelson, he's a big defensive tackle. Defensive tackle is a position that Texas is going to need a big fill-in this year. He may have went undrafted, but Poona Ford was a very talented player at Texas. Hard defensive tackle to replace, and Tom Herman talks about that a lot. Tom Herman always talks about how much Poona Ford meant to that defense and how hard he is to replace. He wasn't drafted in the NFL again. I don't even think he received a combine invite, but there is a good chance he'll be on an NFL roster next year. So Chris Nelson is going to have big shoes to fill in that defensive tackle position this year. He needs to be a good pass rusher, shed off those interior linemen, stop the run. There's a lot Chris Nelson will be tasked with. And then the other one that was invited was Andrew Beck, a tight end. Texas talks about how they're going to be more of a pro-style offense and use a tight end more, but it's not really working. Texas has really struggled at the tight end position in years. They haven't had a guy, I'd say, at that position since maybe Jermichael Finley, a very good, reliable tight end. Andrew Beck's had a lot of injury problems. He missed a lot of games last season he missed, I think, the whole season actually last season with a fractured foot. So that definitely took the tight end position out of Texas's offense a lot. Texas often runs spread with a lot of wide receivers. So Andrew Beck could see more playing time this year. Texas definitely needs to revamp its offense after the offense no-showed, I'd say, for a good portion of last year because their defense will almost help them win every single game on that schedule. Offense just didn't score enough points. So Andrew Beck was the other player that they brought to the media day. But once again, none of the players really brought the fire and energy to media day like Breckyn Hager did. And Tom Herman's also a good personality. He's definitely an interesting character in interviews too.
I'm looking at a list of comments that Breckyn Hager made at Big 12 Media Days. He refers to Nelly, Chris Nelson, the player you just referred to, as the silent killer. He referred to Malcolm Roach, basically said, this guy's the universe to me, talked about that they ignite each other, they inspire each other, they get each other fired up for games. Had a lot of interesting things to say, although the first thing out of his mouth apparently was that I'm not throwing any curveballs out there. I'm playing it straight. Don't expect anything out of me that you can run with and criticize or run with and make fun of or anything like that. So he's trying to button it up and still be a personality, but be somebody that they can count on. And Tom Herman made the comment, as you well know, that he trusts Breckyn Hager to come to Big 12 Media Days and to be able to present himself. And he was voted there by his teammates. So that says something for the young man as well. He hates the long hair, actually. At this point, he would love to dispose of the long hair for good reason, because that means Texas won the Big 12 championship, but just flat out, he says it's like an alter ego. It's gotten out of hand, and he would love to see it go sometime soon. And that would be sometime maybe the first week of December for Texas fans. Steve, when we look at the Texas defense as well, we know that in addition to the aforementioned Poona Ford, Sean Elliott, Malik Jefferson, and others, that some guys that were just recently recruited and signed are going to have to step up. Do we have any, I know we've talked about this in the past, but did Tom Herman refer to anybody in particular that maybe has been off the radar either before they're just coming into the program or because they were just special teams players or redshirted that may need to be counted on this year?
Defensively, he mainly talked about the defensive tackle position. I said with the absence of Poona Ford earlier and seeing Chris Nelson represent the team in that position, and also with the defensive ends, Breckyn Hager and Charles Omenihu, who are now going to be seniors. It's going to be a very veteran class here. He did not really talk much about all the star recruits that he had, specifically guys like B.J. Foster and Caden Stearns, who could battle for starting safety positions this year. But Texas's defense is in great shape. They have Todd Orlando anchoring that. And remember that name, because I would almost guarantee that Todd Orlando within the next 3 to 4 years will be a head coach at a pretty good Group of Five college, or maybe a Power Five college. Like Pat Narduzzi went from Michigan State defensive coordinator to Pitt. Todd Orlando could go that route. He has succeeded at every single program he's been. He had a good defense at Houston, which was best renowned for stopping Baker Mayfield in Oklahoma. And last year, Texas, I don't even know if they allowed 30 points to a team after the Maryland game last season. Texas's defense was that good. And I think even without guys like Malik Jefferson and Deshaun Elliott, they can be very good again. They might not be at the great level they were last year, like holding Oklahoma State to 10 points in regulation, great. But they are well-balanced, and they have strengths in every area. I'd say that the linebackers are about the weakest position unit without Malik Jefferson on Texas's roster. But their secondary is strong. They have Chris Boyd and Devontae Davis returning at the corners. P.J. Locke, who's been a great nickel dime. He's been a great safety, just a hard hitter. P.J. Locke's I think one of the best safeties in college football now. Texas's defense is very deep too. They have good reserves. I mentioned the freshmen earlier. If they don't get starting positions, B.J. Foster and Caden Stearns, these are high 4- or 5-star recruits on this defense. The unit's going to be very good in a conference where offense is king and where offense is what seems to win Big 12 championships. Texas's defense is going to be a huge factor. It's going to be almost like a trap game for the teams that are used to putting up all those points, like Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. They're going to have to play a different style football when they play Texas. And the defense is what's going to carry this team this season, unless the offense really picks it up and shows a lot of differences from last year.
Yeah, so we talked about the oddity of Tom Herman being the offensive guru that comes from Ohio State, where they won a national championship. He comes to Texas, and actually Charlie Strong, known for defense, not able to develop the offense or the quarterback position there at Texas. Tom Herman takes over. You would expect the improvement overall, which we saw, but we saw it on the defensive side and not on the offensive side. And actually, as you outlined the last time we talked about it, the offense kind of flattened out last year. Now, I would think with the experience that those two quarterbacks have, and with the likes of little Jordan-Humphrey and Colin Johnson on the outside, and the experience and talent that they bring, even though the running back position's a bit unproven and the offensive line's a big question mark, that it would be rather feasible that the offense needs to be much better and should be much better.
It's a toss-up. I said the offensive line, I think, could get a little worse this year, and they're not really that strong at the running back position. I did like what I saw from Daniel Young, specifically in the Texas Bowl, but I mainly liked what I saw from him as a short yardage situation receiver, sort of running back, third down running back, and that seems to be the role of Daniel Young on this team. Texas is a passing team with those quarterbacks, and their best runner, it's number 11, Sam Ehlinger. Last year, his running is what helped the team beat Kansas State. He is the best runner on the team, and behind a not experienced offensive line, and with that backfield this year, I don't expect Texas's running game to get too much better from what it was last year. I think the passing game is going to be very solid. Colin Johnson, Lil Jordan-Humphrey, those are big, strong receivers. Texas definitely has the necessary receivers to run a potent offense. Even guys like Gerard Hurd, a former quarterback under Charlie Strong, former starting quarterback, is on the receiver depth chart too, and Donovan Duvernay, who is the brother of former Texas receiver Devin Duvernay. So Texas definitely has a lot in the receiving game. I said my questions are going to be with anything that's not a quarterback or receiver in Texas's offense. How's that offensive line going to be? What about the running back situation? Daniel Young, Tennille Carter, maybe Kyle Porter after Chris Warren decided to leave the program. There are a lot of question marks with the running backs, the tight ends, if Andrew Beck can stay healthy, and does Texas use the tight end a lot more if he is? And then the offensive line, how do they play without Connor Williams? How do they play together? Can Patrick Vahe take over and just become a dominant offensive lineman for this team? I'd say offense has so many question marks, and that's why Texas, this should be a great season for Texas, and the fact that they don't have to worry about Mason Rudolph or Baker Mayfield or Kenny Hill or I think even Jesse Ertz anymore. They don't have to worry about guys like that on other Big 12 offenses. But Texas's offense isn't too great where they're really gaining an edge there.
MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. Of course, subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't. Get yourself ready for college football. We're just about 40 days away, and we bring on the best bloggers, broadcasters, and writers in the industry. And you also have to put up some analysis from myself as well. If you enjoy the audio instead, you go to Google Play, Podbean, and iTunes and search Mark Rogers TV. We're talking Texas football. And the two teams that I keep hearing about in the offseason to challenge Oklahoma, Steve, have been Texas. For good reason. I've been one of those people that have touted Texas talent and the program getting much better under a coach that, at least to this point, I believe in, based on what he did at Houston and beating the likes of Florida State and Louisville twice and some other teams. And based on the Texas talent again and on the defensive side of the ball, and considering that Tom Herman should be able to develop a quarterback. And then West Virginia, that I'm not sold on, getting a lot of pub because of Will Grier at quarterback, most of all, and all the speed and elusiveness at wide receiver. But then when it came down to it at Big 12 Media Days, who did everybody vote for? They voted for Oklahoma. It was the biggest landslide that I've ever seen in media voting for a conference champion. But if the Big 12 media is anywhere close to the accuracy of SEC media, then that means absolutely nothing. But at this point, the faith and the confidence is still in Oklahoma to rule this conference.
There are two Power 5 conferences which are run by teams. The SEC is run by Alabama. The Big 12 is run by Oklahoma. Most of the other conferences, I know there's Ohio State's and Clemson's, usually rotate in and out. But Oklahoma has had a stranglehold on this conference forever. From Jason White to Sam Bradford to even Landry Jones to Baker Mayfield. Oklahoma, for the while, it was Bob Stoops, and then Lincoln Riley just comes in and gets to the playoff in his first season. This is Oklahoma's conference. They will be the team to beat until they just have multiple non-10-win seasons in a row, which doesn't seem in the foreseeable future. Even without Baker Mayfield at quarterback, Kyler Murray, don't forget that he was actually one of the top talents in the state, if not the country, at quarterback when he was recruited by Kevin Sumlin at Texas A&M. He didn't really work out there because I think Texas A&M was just trying to replicate Johnny Manziel with all of its quarterbacks after him, and that wasn't really Kyler Murray's style of play. So Kyler Murray is going to take over as Oklahoma's quarterback this year. But once again, Oklahoma recruits very well. They have a lot of good players, and I'd be a little bit surprised if they didn't win the conference again this year. They seem like they win the conference every year. Just remember a couple of years ago when Oklahoma lost to Houston, got crushed by Ohio State in Norman. Yes, that was in Norman. And then they still just ran the table and won the conference. That's what the Oklahoma Sooners do. So they definitely deserve every vote for first place, just like Alabama. It's vote them first until you prove me wrong. And Oklahoma still has plenty of good talent on it despite losing Baker Mayfield. For example, running back Rodney Anderson, he could be a Heisman candidate this year carrying the offense. And I completely agree with you on the fact that I'm not sold with West Virginia. Yes, West Virginia has guys like Will Grier and David Sills, a very deadly offensive combo returning. But I think West Virginia is just getting hyped because everyone else in the Big 12 left. I mentioned earlier, guys like Mason Rudolph and Kenny Hill and Baker Mayfield are all gone. I think people just see that Will Grier is the best quarterback in the conference, and maybe that could carry West Virginia to the top. But West Virginia, they seem to be a team that starts seasons hot a lot, but then at the end they just can't put their foot on the gas and finish. Remember a couple seasons ago when they could have beaten Oklahoma in the snow and won the tiebreaker for first place in the Big 12 at that point, and they just couldn't get it done. West Virginia, and then later that season they lost their bowl game, Russell Athletic Bowl, to Miami. they just don't seem to get it done late in the season, and I'm not really convinced that this is the second best team in the Big 12. But then I have concerns with other teams too. Oklahoma State, they had just one of the biggest mass exoduses of talent I could remember. It was the only thing left in Oklahoma State, pretty much Justice Hill. You lose guys like Ramon Richards on defense, Trey Flowers on defense, just a lot of talented players from James Washington and Mason Rudolph. The whole Oklahoma State team seems like they're gone. But luckily for them, Mike Gundy has been a tremendous, consistent coach over the years. So I don't know if I'd group them in that category. I'd probably put West Virginia above them. But just let's clarify right now. I'd put Oklahoma number 1. Number 2, I'm just going to say TCU. I know Kenny Hill's gone, but this is a team that's returning a lot of the good defense again. And Gary Patterson, just like Mike Gundy, has been a very consistent coach. TCU seems to get doubted almost every season. They'll occasionally have a down year like they did 2 years ago when they went 6-7, or in 2013 when they went 4-8. But TCU always seems to bounce back from those bad seasons with incredible years. The only thing TCU couldn't do last year was beat Oklahoma, really. Oklahoma, they kept getting them in at bad times, and Oklahoma blew them away twice, including in the inaugural Big 12 championship game in Dallas. But I still think TCU is the second best team in the conference. And I think 3 and 4 are West Virginia and Texas. So I think that the Big 12 media poll got the top 4 right, but I think West Virginia might be more of a 4 and Texas is a 3 because Texas has a just strong defense and they have potential with decent quarterbacks in Ehlinger and Buechele. I had projected a 9-4 finish for Texas this season, and that seems right for about a third-place team in the conference. And then for the rest of the conference, it's up to interpretation. I like Oklahoma State at 5. Iowa State returning Kyle Kempt and David Montgomery at 6. And then to round out the conference, Kansas State 7, Texas Tech 8, Baylor 9, and then you guessed it, Kansas at 10.
Kansas at 10. That's a stunner. So are those the official picks? The Steve Helwick predictions for 2018?
Those would be my picks. It's pretty similar to the Big 12 media poll. I think I just flipped Kansas State and Iowa State, and I flipped Texas, and then I flipped Texas, West Virginia, and TCU a little bit. But the Big 12, all that's ever guaranteed is Oklahoma at the top and Kansas at the bottom, and almost everything else just seems to have a lot of parity in it. I said there's so much uncertainty with the teams like Oklahoma State and TCU this year. We don't know what we're going to get out of them. And then Baylor, Matt Rhule's second year, who knows? Baylor had so many consistent good years in a row and just one bad 1-11 season. Who knows how soon they'll be back? They played Oklahoma tight last year. They looked good in some of those losses.
We enjoy the conversation with Steve Helwick. You can join him at the Daily Texan, also TSTV. That's the campus station there at the University of Texas. And Big 12 fans, you got to eat this up and check out all the videos that we posted with our guests throughout the week. Kansas State, Texas, a number of times. Oklahoma, a number of times. Oklahoma State, TCU, probably a few that I'm missing. West Virginia last night as well. In running through Big 12 Media Days. And, of course, the boys go to camp in just a couple weeks. Hopefully we can have Steve back to preview the Texas Longhorns for 2018 with maybe some news coming out of August camp here in the next few weeks. Steve, we appreciate the time, sir.
Thank you very much, Mark.
I'd like to let everyone know that we will be back in just about an hour and a half with Miami Talk from Cam Underwood of State of the U, 8 o'clock Eastern time. And again, if you want to dive into Big 12 football and get yourself caught up with all that was stated there at Big 12 Media Days this week, please check out the videos. Steve, we'll see you next time. Everybody else, 8 o'clock Eastern time with Miami. See you soon.